In today's episode, I speak to Matt Summers on his belief that coaching is no longer a choice in the manager's toolkit. We have a wide-ranging conversation on coaching in the workplace. We consider whether we have reached a period of time where knowledge without experience is now prevalent. Knowledge is no longer a currency. All managers now need to be able to coach. Listen up to the rest of our conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today, our guest is Matt Summers. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Jude. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. What about you?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, I know we have a very interesting conversation to have, but before we do, tell me about you.
Well, I am. I'm the guy who obsesses over the idea as the manager of coach in businesses and organisations. In fact, most recently, those ideas have kind of coalesced in the notion that if you're a manager of people in your workplace, then you are a coach whether you like it or not. And I've been posting around that idea lately, and it seems to be really, really resonating with people. So, I saw some connections with that set of thoughts, I guess, in the work that you're doing around maverick leaders. Mm-hmm. But I guess in terms of, me, that's what I spend an awful lot of my time doing these days, is trying to propagate that idea, that perhaps in businesses, coaching isn't really any longer a choice, something that we can pick up and put down again, something only to be used when something's gone wrong. I think my ideas over the years have developed into this sense now that it's an ongoing thing, and we're either probably doing it well or we're either probably doing it badly, but somehow we're always doing it.
So do you think it's become more true today than, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I do, because I think that, as I was thinking about talking to you today and started toying with this idea of maverick leadership, and forgive me, I haven't had time yet to fully engage with your stuff, and I haven't read your book. I will try to do so. And so I was thinking instead, well, what does it mean to me about being a maverick leader? And I suppose I arrived at the possibly quite sad idea that to be a manager in a business or an organization today, and to be a real proponent of the coaching approach, would probably still position you as a maverick. It would still be outside of the norm. And I got involved in coaching in about 1994 when I was first.
Wow, that's a long time ago, because people thought coaches then were really weird, didn't they?
Well, they still do. Perhaps that's just me, But yeah, but I still think it's probably it's not that common, to be this dyed-in-the-wall coaching manager, to be a manager who believes that the essence of what you're there to do is to grow and develop your people so that they can get a result. My sense is still that, as I've already said, so coaching is a tool in the kit bag to be reached for as and when, but it's not the default. It's not the how we are. It's still coaching as task, and I think that the need to move away from coaching as a task to be scheduled and arranged and with a clear start and finish, and for us to evolve into coaching as style, there is still work to do, but I think it's ever more needed, because the alternatives to it, which people like me might think of as the old-fashioned kind of command and control style, I think are just breaking up all the more and with ever greater speed, because it just doesn't work in the world of today. So again, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think the need is now more than ever.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether that's to do with the new generation of employees, a new type of employees, the Generation Z, late millennials, have that.
Yeah.
Have that. In fact, I was talking to this millennial. He's an early millennial yesterday, and he will be he's on the podcast, so you'll see him soon. But it was interesting because the way that he was speaking was exactly the sort of thing that Generation X baby boomers get really annoyed about. It was that kind of, I want to have impact straight away, but I know I don't know the stuff. I want my boss to be able to take honest feedback from me about how they're doing, and things like that. And he's just like, yeah, but you don't know anything yet, Joe.
Well, I don't have an academics view on sort of Generation Z and millennials and so on, and I do think there's always a risk in sort of obvious stereotypes. We can lean into that a bit too readily, but of course the needs of that generation in the workplace are changing, because the needs of the baby boomers and things changed from the post-war or just after the war generation, and it'll change again down the line. I mean, that's just how things evolve, isn't it? But I find that the generation entering the workplace now, their needs, of course, are very, very different, and they just won't put up with being yelled at, if I might put it in such simple terms. It's not been their experience. They're not used to it. They don't welcome it. They don't want it. It's not going to do anything for them. It isn't going to be a productive way of managing that generation of people. So we could argue till the cows come home, Jude, you and I, about whether that's kind of right, wrong, or indifferent. But the fact is, that's just the way it is. And baby boomer generation like me and my contemporaries ought not to get too uptight about that, because it's us that brought them up. So
it's your fault.
They are the product of us and our upbringing and the environment of those times, as am I, and as are you. We just have to move with the times.
Yeah, what I was thinking when you was talking is that there's the difference. I'm thinking now is that there's knowledge but not experience. So in the past, where you had to really fight for that experience, whether that meant you went to a library and got an encyclopedia out and you did multiple researches on something, or that you had to have many years of different experiences to gain insight. That's quite changed now, isn't it? So you can just Google the information, but it doesn't mean you know what. So I can see why coaching is more important, because you don't necessarily know what to do with the information once that you've got it.
I agree completely, and I think also the sort of the half-life of that information, the time over which that will be useful to you and current and up to date is minuscule, isn't it? I mean, my education was about acquiring a body of knowledge that you acquire to the age of 16, 18, sort of 21, depending on how far you stayed in education. And then that body of knowledge would serve you a working lifetime. Well, I wouldn't like to guess what the kind of validity is for the body of knowledge that you leave university or whatever with now, possibly 2, maybe 3 years if you're lucky. So this idea of the currency of knowledge, I think, is changing. And so therefore, what's changing alongside that, as I see, is this idea of the manager as expert, or the idea that management is about being the one with the superior knowledge, and then your job is to kind of convey that knowledge to your team, whoever, so that the wisdom passes from you into them. That's just not sustainable anymore. It no longer works. So instead, managers, I think, have to be about enabling their team to go find knowledge as and when they need it, recognize the limitations of that knowledge, because what we might find online and things, may or may not be true. There's that side of things as well to think about, and then also to think about, but how long is that answer that you found today going to be the case. So I always find myself coaching managers and leaders to be very, very wary of solving today's problem with yesterday's solution. That's extremely risky now.
Yes, definitely. And it just made me think about a conversation I had with a friend who was asking, how do you get people to do stuff? And I was saying, well, as a manager, every conversation is a coaching one. And she was really surprised. And to me, it just seems to be common sense. But then again, I suppose it's that kind of different view, isn't it? Because it's quicker to constantly telling people, but they'll never leave you, will they? They'll be always clinging to your ankles if you are that source of information, and that doesn't allow you as a manager to do anything else.
Well, that's right, and quicker, really. Possibly you get a bit of you solve a problem today, but all you've really done is kick the can down the road, haven't you? Because if we answer people's problems for them continually, you're just establishing this sort of dependence loop. And like you say, just acquiring followers, really. People who trot around the office or the building after you, looking for you every time you've got a question that's answering. Yeah.
Okay, so if you believe that every manager's a coach, where does that take you?
Well, I suppose it takes us to the idea that if every manager is a coach, then you ought to get good at it. And if that sounds like a clumsy plug, I don't mean it to, because there has never been more access to things that are going to enable you to do that, So, yeah, I, as you can imagine, run courses and workshops and things, but that's after all sorts of material that you can gain before you go to those extents. Online articles, e-learning, books. Yeah, and it's all there, and it's all for free. So I think that what's more important is just this realization that if you arrive in a job, maybe you get a promotion or whatever, and there's an aspect of your role, you've got a people responsibility, you are now going to have to get results through other people rather than just yourself, then from that point forward, you are their coach. And if you ask people, and I do this, in some of the conversations and group work that I do, have a conversation with people and say, well, what are your expectations of somebody who would act as a coach? What qualities would you look for? What attributes are important? And then you ask them, well, what qualities and attributes would you look for in a team leader, a manager, a CEO? In terms of getting results through people, those two lists will be almost identical. And I don't think, Jude, that's anything new. I think that's been the case for as long as there's been people gathered. It probably goes back to, the agricultural age, or when we were all wandering around cave mouths, thinking about what to hunt for supper that night, where we've got to get together as people. There has always been a need for coaching. And coaching, I suppose, in business is a relatively new word, or I suppose a useful word to kind of convey that sort of approach to managing and developing people. But there are those people that have always done that. There are those people that have always done that very well. It's just that now we call it the coaching approach, but let's not fool ourselves that it's anything new. So, yeah, I think there's a growing need for the coaching approach, but it's one it's always been there. So, to answer your question, where does that take us? I think it's time to grasp the nettle there and start doing it well.
Yeah, I see a lot of organisations who say, okay, we will just do this ourselves, but they don't get the results. And I wonder whether, I think it's similar to leadership, isn't it? Where people say, I've been a manager for X amount of years, therefore I'm excellent at it. Therefore I'm a great coach because I have people underneath me who do what I say. It's that kind of misunderstanding what it's about.
Yeah, and which came first there? Yeah, I agree. I think one of the problems in using the terms coach and coaching is that's such a wide, such a sweeping word, really, that covers such a multitude of approaches now. It's almost become meaningless. In fact, I was having a bit of a bit of a spat on LinkedIn the other day with somebody that said people like me really ought not to call themselves coaches because it's been cheapened by misuse. A few years ago, everyone who was the previous evening a consultant or whatever decided to reinvent themselves as a coach because that was going to mean they appeared in the searches and it was a popular term. But what happens, I think, or I guess we're sort of living through now, is that, well, what does that mean? If I'm going to take up coaching with my people, what does that have me doing? And I think the problem that extends out of that then, Jude, what I observe is a lot of old wine in new bottles. So some old behaviours, which I might recognise as still being quite directive, still quite telling, still quite commanding, being called coaching. And they're really anything but, because, well, we can get into it, but coaching is about the emphasis on the other person and all of that good stuff, but if we're still telling people what to do and how to do it, well, that ain't coaching, and we shouldn't call it that because it just creates confusion and allows people to labour under this misapprehension that they're doing good coaching, and then when they don't get an improved result, it's the coaching approach that gets the blame rather than the recognition that they haven't really changed anything.
That makes sense. I was just wondering, actually, I mean, and you probably have as well, in the say the SME market or the outside corporate market, you do come across coaches that create real damage because they've done a course, they spent £1,000 or something, done a course, have become coaches, and yesterday they were something else. Today they're a coach because they did a course for 3 hours or something, and then they've caused such damage to an individual. Is that danger still possible in the corporate world, or is it less likely to happen because you're really only talking about work performance issues?
No, I think that danger is present in any context where there's coaching going on. I pick up a few clients that way, so I should be very wary of biting the hands that feed. But I had an individual. I did some external one-to-one stuff as well, and I was working with a client of mine a few weeks ago, and he said, "Well, Matt, your approach is just so very different. I had coaching in the past, and your approach is so very different." And I was genuinely surprised to hear that because kind of coaching is coaching. And so I asked him, well, tell me about the coach that you worked with previously and what did that guy do for you? And he said, well, he would come along, and we'd sit down and he'd say, right, well, this week's session then is going to be on time management or something. And here's what I'm going to teach you about time management. And then there'll be a homework assignment. And when we gather next month, you can tell me how you've got on with that. And then we'll move on to that month's topic. And I thought, well, I don't know what I would call that apart from hopeless. Sounds like but
maybe it's training or something. Yeah.
Well, yeah, training, mentoring, but it was all my client was almost irrelevant in all of this. I think if he hadn't even turned up, this guy would have probably still delivered the same session to an empty room. Coaching at work, I think is about, it has a performance focus. It's about let's go from where we are and move forward. So again, to clarify that, and I think it speaks to your previous point, coaching should not just be remedial. And I think that's another problem that sees coaching underutilized and feeds its poor reputation. It's something that's done when something has gone wrong. And when we position it as such, well, hardly surprising that people don't kind of raise their hand and volunteer to get some coaching, because it's going to mark them out as an underperformer, or where something's gone wrong. So coaching must have that performance focus. Let's get people from where they are to where they want to be, or we need them to be, or just fulfilling their potential. It's all about forward movement. But the other thing is it ought to be person-centered. So if we're going to take a coaching approach, that ought not to be dictated or led by the coach. It's not for us to set the agenda. It's about working with the individual where they are at that point in time and understanding their agenda, I suppose, and what they see as important and what's occupying their mind and where they want to find their focus and where they're experiencing white noise and how they'd like to be free from that. So this idea that a coach, whether that's an internal coach or an external one, would go in with some preset agenda, makes me uneasy, I suppose. I mean, time and a place for everything. I don't want to decry the work of other people, but personally, I wouldn't call that coaching, and I'm not sure it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's interesting view, because I think it depends. How do I feel about that? I think it depends on what the purpose is, because you can have that kind of generalized performance coaching, like it's a holistic thing, not necessarily remedial or anything like that. It's just a holistic, let's improve communication skills or whatever. Yeah. And then you've got that, actually, this particular aspect of your job isn't going well, and this is what we need to do. So it's remedial, but not in a disciplinary area. It's just, this isn't as good as it should be. We have a specific need that needs to be done, and we'll coach. And so that will be a bit more prescriptive in terms that there's an defined end result. How you get there will depend on the individual and the pace and all the rest of it. But there is an end result.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think we have to, maybe take a purist approach like mine and have that match reality, which says, well, in the case of hiring in an external coach, there's going to be some budget, there's going to be other stakeholders involved, there's going to be a timeline, and there's going to be a need to address something, whether that's an improvement or solving a problem. So yes, of course, those things come into play. But I think really the effective coach is going to hold it that it's the individual, their client or their coachee, to use those words, who will have the insight. It's that person who's ultimately going to have to learn from their own experience in order to make lasting change. And we've got to work with that, albeit that there will be a context that's led to coach and coachee sitting in a room together, trying to figure some stuff out.
Yeah, and I was just walking back a little bit in the sense that you're right, a manager as a coach, as part of his role, is quite different from an external coach coming to do a specific task. And I think and I see your point, that is quite different. And what I don't understand is that managers don't realise just how much more engaged and productive their employees are going to be if you have more coaching conversations as a matter of, this is how I work, as opposed to do as I say conversations. Because for me, that would be self-evident that it's a better result.
Yes. Yeah, and me likewise. So maybe between us, you and I, we're not going to get much insight onto that. But I agree. To me, it seems, why would you do anything else than try and have your people being the best that they can be, the happiest they can be at work situation, brimful of knowledge and new experiences? I find it hard to think that that's anything other than a sensible idea. But
so what do you think?
Anti-coaching pervades. Were you going to ask what do I think is the cause of that?
Yeah, because I'm quite interested actually, because as I say, especially nowadays with individuals saying, develop me because I'm here, not because I've earned the right to be developed. Don't tell me what to do, help me get there. This is kind of demanded by the workforce now, and yet it is still quite resisted. So why is that? Because it's kind of counterintuitive.
I think it's the scourge of short-termism. If I'm there's it's a title in itself, isn't it?
I like that. I might even use that.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you can consider that one nicked from this point forward. Well, I don't know. I mean, we might be chasing down a side alley, but I think that I don't know. Let's imagine I'm a sales manager and this quarter's numbers are down, and I've got to think about how I can address that. And I'm going to maybe toy with coaching my team that might see the fruits of that come along in 9, 12, 18 months time. Or I can get them in a room and, put the slide up with the numbers down and sort of yell at them a little bit and try and get a short-term fix for this quarter's numbers. And if that works, because sometimes it sort of does in the short term, doesn't it? It's probably going to have me kind of doing it again the next time I find myself in a similar situation, and it creates these sort of tricky habits to break. I mean, when I work with managers who want to take up the coaching approach in a workshop situation. And the biggest barrier, I suppose, is always time. When am I going to get the time to do this? And I get that, I mean, that's a perfectly legitimate kind of concern. And I suppose people like me who up till now perhaps have made the motherhood and apple pie argument that you should do coaching because it's a really good thing to do. It's not good enough. We have to present a case. And I think that most people get the idea that the take up of the coaching approach is something of an investment. You're going to have to perhaps take some pain now in order for a greater gain down the track. But that's hard to do, certainly in a commercial setting when most of the pressure will be on the here and now, won't it? It's to achieve numbers now. It's to reduce complaints now. It's to improve sales figures now. It's to address a shortage in talent acquisition now.
I guess if you view it as distinctive from managing, I suppose it is a bit of a pain. But if you think that leadership is all about influence and influencing people to do stuff, and the best way to influence people is to figure out where they come from, where they want to be, how does that work, it becomes almost something that you do. So if somebody comes up and says, I don't know how to do this, what do I do? And you turn around with, what's your first thoughts on this? Let's talk that through. You immediately walk into a coaching conversation. It's not distinct. So you're not doing it any different. It's just part of how you lead, isn't it? Because you've just, you just go straight into coaching in that one conversation by just switching it around and say, well, what would you do here? Or what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
Or, I can't figure this out. What are you trying to achieve? And immediately, boom, you're straight into a coaching conversation.
You are, as long as you are mindful to ask that question instead of what is often a response of team member arrives with, I don't know what to do about this. And leader's response is, here's what you should do about this. That's probably, well, indeed, but that's probably the switch that needs to be activated, isn't it? Is that, that kind of habitual response of, I'm the manager, I ought to have the expertise. And also there's a little bit of an ego stroke, isn't there? Well, this person's come to me with a problem and it's really good because I've got an answer for them. So that's good for them and that's good for me. Well, maybe in the short term it is, but not beyond that. What we really need is the approach that you're suggesting where, okay, let's have a think about how you could go about doing that. I mean, one of my favorite coaching questions, which just popped into my head when you were painting that little example, was what would you do if I wasn't here? And I have found that to be just such a great kind of opener. Because I think that all too often those sort of structures, I encounter a problem, I need to go talk to my manager about it. They're just habitual, people don't of question these things. If we do question them, then there's normally all sorts of more interesting avenues that open up. And I think the other thing that does, Jude, is it just makes the work experience for the individual. I mean, I don't mean literally work experience, with a capital W, but their day-to-day experience of the workplace a more interesting and enjoyable kind of setup if they're not just continually being spoon-fed what they need to do. This is the essence of the coaching approach.
Yeah, it just made me think of one of my favourite coaching questions is when people say, I don't know what to do. And then you immediately say, but if you did know, what would you do? And then they come and tell you the perfect answer. That never fails. It's just amazing, isn't it? If you get the timing right, they'll go, well, I would do this. And you'd go, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. I don't know what to do. Isn't that terrible? What could you do? Oh, well, what I could do is A, B, C, D, and E. Yeah. Amazing. But that, I think, again, is kind of, because there's a lot of sort of, I don't know how to describe it. People's thinking gets stuck in a rut, doesn't it? It's in very sort of well-worn grooves, and they just stick to those grooves. And one of the most useful things, therefore, I think that we can do as a manager who coaches is lift our people out of those grooves to break those patterns. The question that you cite there, well, if you did know, what could you do? If you saw that written on paper, that's going to look a bit kooky, but I've experienced the power of it. You clearly have. I think it's because it's it disrupts, doesn't it?
It's unexpected, isn't it?
Yeah, it disrupts patterns of thinking, and until and unless those patterns of thinking are disruptive, well, we won't find new and novel and innovative and, dare I say, maverick ways of tackling old problems.
Yeah, I was just thinking there actually that coaching encourages people to be curious, doesn't it?
Yeah, coach and coachee, actually. I mean, I've heard it said that a coaching conversation is one in which two people are engaged in learning, and I think that's. I can't remember who said that. I wish it was me, because it's a lovely, it's a lovely capturing of. I think the vibe that should be going on. That's that sort of environment, and so curiosity on the part of both coach and coachee, you would observe, wouldn't you, going on in a conversation that was set up that way. Certainly for a manager who wants to very visibly be seen to be doing a lot of good coaching, I would really advocate that. Just be curious. It's a great weapon. So to go back to your scenario, a team leader comes and says, "Hey, manager, I've got a problem. I don't know what to do about this." I mean, one of our responses to people, "Isn't that interesting? Let's just sit down and have a think about that. How have we arrived at this point? What were the causes? Have we encountered this before? If we looked at this in a new and novel way and decided we would do anything other than how we've solved it in the past, what new things could we come up with, you and I?" So I certainly find in my coaching that I think I probably learn as much about coaching from each coaching session that I undertake as the coach as the people that I'm coaching. And I think that's right and proper. It's isn't that great?
Yeah, I was just thinking that when the manager has been a coach and he's doing it well, he's actually giving up himself, isn't he? He's giving up his ego, and that might be why people don't do it often enough. So, because to do it properly, you have to be quiet in yourself, don't you, and focus completely on the other person, not your opinions, not it's right or wrong or whatever. You have to be there for that person, and that's probably the hardest part of coaching for a lot of people.
It is. I mean, I think that I've said that the great challenge of coaching is not taking up doing new things, it's giving up doing old things, and that normally is to let go of the need for control. And again, it's hard, and we must recognize that, because short-termism pervades, and so it's safer sometimes to exert control, isn't it, and micromanage. But certainly, again, if I wanted to observe somebody moving away from command and control and into a coaching style, that I think is one of the things you'd notice happening, that they were giving up this need for control. Definitely.
Yeah, I've always said to, if I remember having a boss that asked me something or other, and I said, "Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I need to ask so-and-so." And I said, "You're the manager. Why don't you know?" And I said, "Well, you're not paying me to know everything that's happening in the department. You're paying me to know what I need to know and to make sure things get done in the way it needs to be done." Yeah. And they were really shocked, and they say, "So you're saying you don't know?" I was saying, "What I'm actually saying is I trust her to come to me at the appropriate time." And she's not reached that point yet.
Absolutely. I mean, I can remember in my early working life, and I had an office supervisor, and this lady's mantra was, "I would never ask anybody to do something I can't do myself." But bear in mind my working life, because I'm ancient. My working life began in the early 1980s. I mean, again, that was ancient. Yeah, that was a fairly sort of laudable, I suppose, kind of management value then. I mean, that was a good thing,
Yeah. I suppose it was a good thing.
It's not sustainable now. It's not sustainable. And going back to an earlier point's kind of come back into my mind, and you were talking about millennials, and certainly a challenge I see for millennials adopting management positions is they just won't have that. They won't. They're often younger than the people whom they manage. They're almost certainly less experienced and perhaps less knowledgeable than the people that they manage. And so that's never going to be a position that they can adopt, even if they did think it's right. So instead, they're going to have to do it Jude style and say, well, my job is not to be the font of all wisdom and to have answers to all questions. My job is to enable the team to find that when they need it and to keep on doing that, because that might be the answer today, but it isn't going to be the answer next week or next month. So this idea of the manager as coach, as we said at the top, I think is becoming inevitable, whether we like it or not. I just think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because a lot of people that I know who are saying now that 40 in organisation is considered very old, past it at 40. And I'm like, what, seriously? And they're saying it's because there are a lot more like late millennials in charge who are uncomfortable with people older than them in the jobs. So they won't recruit older people than they are, or they will get rid of older people because they don't see themselves as coach or facilitator or leader even. So they see it as, I don't know as much as that person, that makes that person dangerous to me, that person needs to go, which I think is really sad, because there's a loss of experience there. And it's also sad for the individual. I mean, if you stop work at 40, and you're expected to not get your pension until you're 70, what are you going to do in those 30 years? Literally, what are you going to do?
It was set up as a coach, I suppose, or
coach the millennials and genders.
I mean, I guess I haven't thought about that previously, but that makes sense. You can easily see that can be the case. And I guess we're probably going through a generation who are, for a variety of reasons, unable to manage their teams in the way that they were managed themselves when they were moving through the ranks. So maybe it's that kind of transition point. And those sort of transitions are always painful, aren't they? As we move from one kind of paradigm, if that's the right word, to the next. No wonder that we're experiencing some pain.
And they're less likely to be in the same organisation. So you'll have your very old 40-year-old. I think I'm still quite horrified at that thought, but your 40-year-old who isn't really looking to move every 2 years, 3 years. Yeah. So then you got the culture and all that all rests in these older people. You can't see me do my speech marks in my fingers, but it all rests with this older generation, with managers that are turning around quite quick. So there's also that kind of suspicion on both sides. Like, so you might have this other person thinking, I can just ride it out because they'll be gone in a couple of years anyway, so I'm not changing. I'm not. So then they'll be saying, look, these older people don't do what I say because they're stuck in the ways, and so you can see the dynamic could get quite difficult.
Yeah, it becomes quite adversarial, and then you get perhaps the older people in that scenario that you set out, hanging on to their knowledge because maybe they want to see this latest young whippersnapper kind of crash and burn, and then they'll be out the door and off we go again. So that suspicion on either side of that divide, dude, just ain't healthy, is it? And I think that if we had some more coaching conversations that are going on, we could maybe have a more honest exchange of views and needs and aspirations and work through some of that.
I agree. That sounds like a good place to stop. So before we do that, though, what tips would you give to a manager who needs to act more like a coach?
Shut up and listen more. No, seriously. I mean, goodness me, how harsh that will sound when I listen to this back. But honestly, again, I mean, and it is becoming a bit cliched, and I speak about this a lot. I've heard plenty of other kind of coaching commentators say the same thing, but it's the simplest thing to describe. It's maybe the hardest thing to do, but it's just zip it. Try to avoid this need to have the airtime and fill the conversation, and just shut up and just listen to people. But I mean, whether we call that active listening or listening at different levels, I've seen it sort of set out in very different ways. It's not just listening to the content of what your people are saying. It's listening for the vibe of that, for want of a better expression, the emotional component. What's being conveyed behind these words, and can you ask people to clarify a little bit more about what they mean when they use certain words and phrases. So to really listen for understanding, beyond listening for content. I think that if you want some low-hanging fruit as far as taking up a coaching approach is concerned, that would be it every single time. If you can just sort of talk a little bit less, and listen a little bit more with a higher degree of quality, then it's been my experience then when people are experiencing that, being truly listened to for possibly the first time in their educational working life, properly listened to, it has an almost magical quality, Jude. You know, people open up and they start telling you more and becoming more and more engaged, and they feel very liberated, I think, to be listened to. And then change and improvement kind of takes care of itself, you know, because people have their voice. So there would be the tip in a nutshell: just be quieter and listen more.
And I would probably add to that: understand the different silences, because silence in itself can tell so much.
Yeah, I mean, of course, because I think in coaching, you know, silence to me can be taken as an indication of some thinking going on. And it is through that thinking process that insight will be found, or learning from experience will happen. So no need to be alarmed by that at all. And I think, again, because of perhaps the way we've been brought up, or our management role models, often the great temptation is to want to fill the silence, isn't it? We're uncomfortable with it. So I agree with you. I think that a line to the listener, or maybe a component of the listening, is to get comfortable with those sorts of silences. It's normally a sign that something useful is happening.
Yeah, cool. So, Matt, would you come again and talk about something else?
Oh God, yeah. I think we need to get into this. What was it? I described it as the tyranny of short-termism, or I can't remember the words I used.
The
now,
scourge of short-termism.
The scourge of short-termism. Yeah. Jude, it's been fascinating. Yeah, thank you for asking such provocative questions. I'd love to come back.
Brilliant, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Matt as much as I enjoyed having it. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com, or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. And finally, if you would like to work with us, or just interested in finding out more about the Maverick at work, check out our website, maverickparadox.co.uk.